Allison Miller, the CEO and founder of Happy Camper Live, and we are here at the Raising a Happy Camper podcast with Jenny Owens. And Jenny, I am so excited to speak with you today, and I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited too. I'm Jenny Owens. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst, which means a lot of things, but for me, it means that I help teach kids new behaviors and new skills so that they can be happy, social, independent, kind of whatever that means for them. And I work a lot with parents and teachers and sometimes camp counselors on helping to create those new skills.
That's amazing. Well, definitely a relevant topic and one that I think that parents and camp counselors, camp directors would love to learn more about. So I just wanted to jump in with you. And well, I guess first of all, tell me about your path. I know you've had different experiences. You've actually been a camp counselor too. I'd love to hear a little bit about your path and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I'm trying to make it as succinct as possible. So I have worked with kids basically my whole life. And I do think that started as being a camper, right? Because you go to summer camp and it's so fun. And then when I finally got old enough to be an assistant counselor, I was really like, oh, I've made it in the world. From being able to be a junior counselor to then babysitter to then teacher's assistant, like I just kind of kept moving it career-wise to working with different groups of children. In college, I studied psychology, thinking I wanted to be a therapist. And then got to my senior year of college, was interning, didn't quite vibe with therapy. I realized it wasn't quite the place for me. And so I started working with kids with special needs. And my plan was to kind of do that to figure out what I was going to do. And then that became my entire passion. I loved it so much. And so from there, went on to grad school, which opened up kind of how I work with children and now families and parents in a different way. And so it's been really, really cool. I've learned a lot about autism, about ADHD, about supporting the way kids learn through, again, skill building and positive strategies and not trying to use punishment or yelling, which I think is so easy to default to, but just a lot of things like that. So we can be supporting kids who need, different support in their environment.
Right. You talk about affirming support. So can you describe what that means a little bit more?
Yeah. And I think it's kind of like a buzzword right now, right? Like, what does neurodiversity affirming care mean? And I think it means different things to different people. But the basic idea is that if their brain works in a different way, trying to force them to behave like it doesn't work in a different way, ultimately means that you're asking them to kind of not be who they are. But by supporting who they are, right? So neurodiversity affirming care would be taking into account how someone likes to learn, how they're motivated, things that they care about, and making sure that what you are teaching them feels good to them and not just to other people. So I think like in the autism community, that would maybe look like not asking a child to make eye contact if that's something that's really difficult for them. Like we don't need to force something that they hate in order for them to learn. So it's kind of picking and choosing our treatment based on what will actually benefit a child rather than sort of what like globally used to be considered good behavior.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm wondering if we could focus a little bit on the social skills side of it. I mean,
yeah,
that seems to be, very relevant and, that kind of learning where you don't have a teacher at home or in social situations. And, we rely on camp counselors who haven't, gotten their PhDs or masters, in psychology. So I'm just wondering, like, when we look at the social side of it, what kind of things can we learn? What skills can we practice as we work with these kind of, children?
Yeah. So I love this story. This just happened to me. So I run social skills groups, and I have a group of 13-year-olds, and I asked them pretty recently, I was like, what do you guys want? Like, what would make socializing better on your side? And they all had the same answer. So I assume it's hopefully representative. But their big thing was like, let me love what I love. Right. Don't tell me it's like babyish to still like trains at 13. Like, let me love what I love. Let me talk about it for way too long because that is me sharing something that I love. And if there's something that makes me mad, just like, let me be mad about it. Right. Don't tell me it's no big deal. Don't talk me out of it. Like, this is me sharing something with you. And I think that we can probably like extrapolate that to sort of mean like socialize with someone where they're at. Like, what do they want to do? What do they want to talk about? If they want to stand 5 feet away and it feels weird, but it's still going fine, like let it be that way. Um, and so I think for counselors, that probably means like finding the one or two things that a child really wants to connect with them on and starting there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also, as you try to support them, these children, in terms of their relationships with other campers, like how can you best support that when they may not understand what their preferences are, like the other kids might not understand that as much?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing to do would be to make it as successful as possible. So if having a conversation is not an area of success, but maybe like side by side art project is, like finding the moments where everyone can feel like they're doing something that feels good rather than someone having to work really hard. And so I think probably that means like redefining what it feels like to be socializing with a child who maybe has different versions of that. So yeah, I'm thinking find an activity that everyone can do together successfully, and be open to whatever that might look like.
Well, that's the beauty of camp as opposed to school, is that you can create any kind of activity and make it like into something that's fun and feels like, oh, it's just the way it's supposed to be. So
Yeah,
if you choose to make up a game in the cabin, or if you're in a day camp situation, in your group, you could say everybody gets to talk for this amount of time holding your talking stick, about
exactly.
their favorite trains, or
Mhm.
their favorite subject, so that gives everybody an equal chance to participate. And then that child can feel like they're actually really part of something.
Yeah, that would be
So that could
amazing.
be kind of a great example. And also, like, we're really great at making games, like I said, out of anything. So if distance is really important, you're not going to maybe do a game that has a lot of physical contact. You might decide that you're going to create a game with a ball that, requires everybody to stand 5 feet apart, and if they're scared of balls flying at them, maybe you decide you're going to pass the ball around. There's just
Yeah.
different ways to, make up the rules. I always say it's always fun to make up the game.
I feel like that's the magic of camp counselors, is like you would never know from the outside that maybe there's not a plan because you're thinking so fast on your feet and everyone is so engaged and happy all the time that it looks like it's such a talent.
Yeah, I call it, what do I call it? Planned spontaneity. Everything is completely planned, but it feels like completely spontaneous to
Yeah.
everybody else. So I think, taking some of these things, I love to see what, the academic world can take from the camp world. But,
Yeah.
you're so structured in a classroom, but be able to like take some of these ideas and be more playful. How do you think that would support a child in school?
Yeah. I'm thinking of certain kids right now who really do thrive at camp and have such a hard time at school. And I think that's so telling, right? It's not that the child's skill set has changed. It's like when they're in an environment that's fun and engaging and maybe is a little bit more patient compared to at school. I think that it's so tough at school because like there's very strict expectations. A lot of times there's a lot of students to one teacher. I think I would love to see school, trying to think of how to say this carefully. I think if teachers could widen their expectations to make room for what a child needs. So, and what I mean by that is rather than saying, well, she just wouldn't sit down even though it was time. Like maybe it becomes, oh, she needs a little more time to make that transition. So we're just going to wait a few minutes. All right. I think being able to take that, like, assume things are going well before you assume it's wrong approach that I think camp
Mm-hmm.
generally does a really great job at. Um, and yeah, making learning fun. Like kids still have to listen at camp. There's still a structure, a
Right.
schedule, a routine, but it doesn't feel the same as it does in a classroom. And it would be cool if it did.
Well, I always say it's even more challenging. Like we'll have a lot of campers that come, to various camps, and at home, during school, they're on medication, they're in this very like structured environment, and the parents say, well, oh, it's camp, so it's just like a lot easier. But actually, it's not always easier at camp because the days are longer, and in a lot of camps, there are structured activities and periods and moving through. So I don't think it's that different. I do believe that within that, though, there are like real solid breaks between activities. It's 10 minutes before you're going to the next activity. You're preparing, you're getting your tennis racket, you're getting, your sneakers on or getting ready to go to a pool. But in school, it's like, okay, it's math, pull out your science. Now we're on to English, and if you're taking a break, it's to eat or it's to like perhaps get a recess, So
well, there's so much, I think there's more motivation, right? Like, so yeah, it might still be a lot of steps, get your tennis racket, get your sneaker, but at the end of that, you get to go tennis. Whereas like, if it's like, get your books, get your pencil, at the end of that, you do math, like there's just a lot more. It's not quite the same.
No, it definitely isn't. But there's something to learn about the timing in between and in the transitions, which I think is what you were talking about. It's just really helping them move through the day in a way that is just easier for them and not having a lot of resistance, right?
Yeah. And I think about, so I used to train paraprofessionals at school, and like an example I always think about is, right, I could say like, okay, play's over, go clean up. And that's okay. Or you can say like, we're going to go clean up and then go outside. Like, quick, throw all the toys into the bucket. How fast can you go? And it's the same amount of energy, the same like end result, but one just feels so much better. And if school was more able to take that approach, I think that would help. I think that helps all students, right? I think kids are kids. They should still have fun. And again, I think oftentimes camp does that really well. And I think sometimes school forgets that you can do that.
Well, we can make everything fun in camp. Like we definitely can make cleaning the bunk fun, which the kids don't like. And we definitely find motivation. I always challenge the counselors on like, pick a favorite song, make it a contest, just all of those things. I feel like, the scoring for inspection doesn't always do the trick, but it's really interesting to see what groups come together and which groups, really struggle with that, and how the leadership, like it would be a good sort of, I don't know, it would be like a good experiment. Maybe you could research this, like what makes a good cleanup team in a summer camp. And then I think you could sell that information to all us camp directors so we can go, oh, all right, that's the magic there.
Yeah.
So with this particular, group of campers or students or children that you work with, how I'd like to go back to connecting them with other kids, because I think to me that is, something that the parents are really seeking, are those social relationships. And you talk about your social skills class that you're working with. So tell me, like, what are some tips if a parent doesn't have the ability to put them in a class? What can they be doing on their end?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I see is that like we tend to teach like with what we're used to. So if we see a child not engaging, right, we're like, oh, go say hi, go have fun. But that's not new information. They've heard that information forever. And so it's more about finding like how we make that transition possible. So maybe it's going with them, or maybe it's starting a conversation and then having the child come in once that like gap has already been bridged. For me, the biggest thing is like, instead of us, like when we're trying to figure out why a kid maybe doesn't want to socialize, like I think it's a disservice to say like, well, they're autistic, they just don't like it. But like it's helping make it easier, right? So like bringing two kids over and saying like, did you guys know you both really love Mario? And then getting it started, right? Or like sitting there and saying like, you know what you could say right now? You could ask about this or this. So it's really getting in there and making the process easier, if that makes sense. Because I think, we tend to say like, go talk, hey, listen, make sure you're looking at her. And it doesn't, like, that's not landing, right? We have to get in there and really help make it successful. And I think another thing is listening out for when a child is communicating, right? So if a kid is saying like, hey, stop it, I don't like that, right? Jumping in and making sure the other person listens rather than like it going kind of unaddressed. Those are two different things, but those.
Yeah. Well, no, I think, and they're both really good topics. And so on the issue of like common ground, I think that's really interesting because you do this exercise where, try to find two or three things you have in common with someone and like what also the differences are. And I think being able to help the child find common ground, that's tough.
Can
It
be.
could just be we like baseball, right? But if it's not an outwardly physical activity, you really do need to be in conversation about it. So also like maybe with a parent, and I'm just thinking, is to set if the children up for success in a play date is to talk to the mother or father or caregiver and say, what are these common interests, that we might be able to
Yeah, that's a
find
great idea.
beforehand, so that you're going into it with success. There's nothing more frustrating and disappointing like when you're arranged a whole, social situation and it's just like, it doesn't go anywhere. And then you're kind of
Right.
holding the space. You've got a kid over for a play date, and then you're like the middle of the play date. So getting that information for a child in advance, then if it's trains, maybe, there's a train they have, right? Have him bring his trains, or
Yeah,
let's
absolutely.
watch this movie. Well, let's have them watch a movie together, or let's make a train. I'm just making this stuff up.
All of it.
But I think with any preparation that a parent can do or a caregiver by communicating with the other, really
Yeah.
can set that up for success. And once they feel the success, I'm sure that builds their confidence and helps them, in the next social situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea.
Yeah. So I'm sure that parents can really um, set things up, in a way for success with a lot of thought and some not even that much time, just a really good conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that also when you are in the schools that you work with and the kids that you work with, or the camps they go to, is the population of campers or students all the same, or do you work with kids that are, in sort of a regular, classroom situation that are trying to, be successful there? What is the populate? How does that look for you?
So both. I think so oftentimes when you are by the time a child is ready for social skills, I think that usually means like they're in a pretty good place, right? So they may be in a general education classroom. So they're doing fine behaviorally and academically, but it doesn't mean that they're happy or that they have friends. And so it's definitely mixed. I think it's definitely important to say like not all kids with autism have the same behavioral challenges or strengths. Not all kids with ADHD have the same. And so it's definitely across the board. Um, but I think that also like trying to think how to answer the question. The answer is that it's mixed, but kids can be successful and connected and have friends in any setting, right? It's really just about finding kind of what is the best for them. And so sometimes autistic kids prefer to only be friends with other kids that are like them and they feel like they can connect over that. Sometimes we want to widen that pool so that they can hang out with everyone. And it really just depends on what people feel most comfortable doing.
Right. So it's really to give your child exposure to a lot of different situations to see where they are connecting and where they feel comfortable and where they're thriving, to
Yeah.
try different things. I know sometimes parents get a little frustrated when, a school isn't necessarily providing what their child needs and they're
Yeah.
looking for other things. My son moved schools a few times and I didn't really see it as a failure. I saw, and it wasn't, it was just like, we're going to find the right school, and he ended up in a music program, which was like the best thing for him and brought out all these skills that he never knew he had. So
That's
I always
nice.
tell parents like that I'm talking to, I'm like, don't get discouraged. Like, also, 1 year with a teacher that just doesn't get your kid doesn't mean your kid is not to be gotten. It's like
Yeah,
that
that's such a good
teacher
point.
just didn't connect. And, we're, for whatever their own reasons, we're unable to make everything work, but that doesn't mean the whole school isn't workable,
Right.
because
Yeah, that's a
it's
really good point.
tough. A school year is a long time to, sit with whatever's going on. These camps, some programs are a week or 3 weeks or 7 weeks, whatever it is. And,
Yeah.
you can move it around a bit, but for school, sometimes parents feel like really like, wow, we're talking, it's probably the first week of school for a lot of kids that I
Mhm.
know. And it's like, they go, oh, okay, well, it looks like we got this teacher. It looks like the kids in the class are this. And there's like all this like anxiety and judgment and all of this going on. And then like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's just a whole year, so I guess, what could you do as a parent at the beginning of the year to set your child up for success? If you're just, getting your teacher a week before school, like, sometimes they don't even tell you.
It's so um depends on where you're listening to this from, but for kids who need it, I think calling IEP meetings or ARD meetings is like the most important. And unfortunately, schools are so overloaded that oftentimes it's, you ask for a meeting and it doesn't happen for like 2 or 3 months. So the kind of non-attractive answer is that parents are put in a position to really have to advocate and really like know the laws in your area, know that a school is legally required to meet with you within a certain amount of time, even if they maybe tell you otherwise. So the biggest thing is just like on the admin side is like get supports in there for your child. But I think on a smaller scale, it's creating a good relationship with the teacher and then sharing with the teacher what the child's strengths are and how we support that. So going in with, he does really great when we give him a 5-minute heads up, right? He doesn't really like this topic, but when he knows this is coming next, like he's really a lot more willing to do it. I think just having open communication with your teacher helps so much, and framing it in terms of like, this helps them be successful, not so much, these are things to watch out for.
Right. And also not feeling that we're asking for accommodations in as a parent in terms of what your requests are. I just did a podcast last week and we talked a lot about that, and communicating with your child's teacher being so important in the process. And just if things are like happening, it was about trauma, adult trauma, and passing it on to your kids. And so being able to tell the teacher, this is what's going on, I think that really applies here too. And, it's not, with the IEP and like you said, the backlog, and you're supposed to have a meeting before school or, within the first 2 weeks of school, and those meetings are taking months, like you still can give yourself that, communication through an email or setting up a phone call, and not be feeling like you can't do that. And I think that was what I got from this other conversation. It was just so important. Like the teachers, I think teachers are overwhelmed, but they want to do the best for their students. And the more information they have, the better they are. I used to write, I think the teachers used to request, like, who's your child? Tell us about your child.
I was just going to say this. Yeah.
And we do that at camp too. And I'm surprised how few parents really like dig in and like tell us so much. I am surprised. I don't know why. I feel like I used to sit and really like write a good 2-pager, like this is my, I was like, this is my chance,
Yeah.
So I really encourage parents to do that too. What are your suggestions around that?
Yeah, I love a cheat sheet. Like, this is how I learn best. Like, if I need help, this is how I ask. Like, this is how you can help me. Like, this is what motivates me. This is what I struggle with. I think the more we can do to make a teacher's life easier, the better. And so if that means putting all the information in one place so they don't have to ask you for it or try to find it somewhere. I have some kids that like it just lives in their binder. So like at any point, the teacher can like pop over the desk, check out the cheat sheet, and it's right there. But I think it's the same exact thing that you're talking about. Like, this is your chance. Like, lay out everything you want a teacher to know, because you don't always have that opportunity to talk to them like at drop off or pickup, right? They're doing their planning or their grading during that time. And I've also seen, and I think a lot of teachers do this too, but I've seen it on the parent side, like a quick communication sheet home, right? So maybe it's like a box that's like, what went really great today? And like what we're going to work on for tomorrow, and making that communication really easy for the teacher to find, like to fill out, also means that as a parent, you get a little bit more information about what's happening at school without feeling like you're kind of chasing your teacher down for it.
Yeah. And it was interesting. You were talking about the IEP, and like not all of your clients, I'm going to assume, have clinical diagnoses. Like it's not necessarily like, parents know specifically like this is what my issues are that I'm dealing with at home. So it's just, to be able to take your child who they are without that particular label on the child, and just say, this is how he or she reacts to, like structure, unstructured time, or if there's a conflict in the classroom, or whatever those things are, or just, because not everybody has that, and not everybody can afford to have the clinical diagnosis made and go through, so that on a private level, and then they're
Right,
waiting
absolutely.
for the school to catch up and have the guidance department be able to, give them the testing that they need. And sometimes that could take, it could take a long time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been in two school districts primarily, and they're both very highly populated areas. And so, yeah, it can take 5 months, 6 months. Sometimes parents are kind of told like, let's wait and see what happens. And then a whole school year has gone by before they've started that then 6 month waiting process. So yeah, I think that's such a good point. Like your child deserves support no matter what. And it's good to communicate with your teacher no matter what. And they should learn in a way that is best capitalizing on their strengths no matter what.
Exactly. Well, let's go talk a little bit more about playing, because I think that's
Yes.
super fun. I mean, I know my limited amount of the academic world
Back to
too,
camp.
but back to camp. So yeah, so I'm just trying to think about, like, there are times in camp when campers would struggle with certain situations, noise, crowded spaces, activities that have like a lot of participants. The whole camp is together,
Yeah.
for a show, or like an activity that gets really exciting. And, so tell me about, some ways that you could support a camper that has, challenges in those situations.
Like this question brings so many memories of like camp sing-alongs and dancing, and like so many for me, so like so much fun, and only now realizing like that is not fun for everyone.
Right.
I think it's really important to empower kids to advocate for what they need. So if a child is in a place where they can say, right, like, okay, I know we're going somewhere noisy, so like I'm going to bring my headphones, and I know I can ask my counselor for space. And so I think it's about teaching them what tools they can access during that time. And that probably would need a conversation with parents before camp. But I'm a big proponent of helping them say what the problem is and say what the solution is. So if a child looks visibly like super uncomfortable, like it looks like this is too loud, do you want to wear headphones or do you want to go take a walk, so that they can start to learn on their own what their options are in those moments. But I think the biggest thing would be just like watching and recognizing, so that you can see as the adult, like when things are maybe becoming too much, so that we can help figure out what the options are. But headphones are like the best thing for too much noise, whether or not they're attached to another sound. But then, yeah, giving options so that, again, a child can tell us what they need instead of us assuming, like, maybe it's not that it's too loud. Maybe there's just like too many people close together. And if I could just stand right over there, I'll be fine. Yeah, I'm not sure if I
really good point. Actually, you did. And it's a really good point, because I think what sometimes people go to is, well, you don't have to go, or you can stay outside.
Right.
But those are really not the social experiences we want them to have. Right. So like you said, if they can wear headphones, or they can stand to the side because the kids are all, sitting on a bench together, it can be overwhelming and uncomfortable. And that slight adjustment, can make a difference for them feeling like they're participating and part of the community. Then, well, when the community gathers together and it feels, like there are a lot of people there and it gets really loud, we're just going to take you out of it. So by asking what it is, I like to say, like, what can I do to support you in this moment?
Totally.
And then the kids will say, hopefully will say what it is that supports them. So I think that is actually a really good point, because we go to the solutions that we think work for the most, for most people, and so if 5 kids in this situation in the past just waited outside until it was over, that's what we, assume, but that's not true. It really, is not necessarily what they want to do. I also feel like there are a lot of challenges around eating, that show up. I don't know if you deal with any of those in your practice, but, it just came to mind, like sitting in at a table with a whole group of kids eating things, that have different spells, and, or there aren't a lot of choices of what to eat because, they're not home and have access to, their, I mean, I had someone who only wanted to eat saltine crackers, like that was their thing. And like, is that okay to just eat? So why is that child only eating saltine crackers? Explaining that to the camp counselor, so I'm curious around the food things, because I think that shows up in a unique way at camp.
Yeah, this is a tough one, only because I think there's like different philosophies on how to handle it, right? Because there are definitely some people who would say, like, they just want to eat saltines, let them eat saltines, and that's how they want to live their life. But then there's also like feeding therapy who would say, a child needs more nutrients than that, and we have to figure out how to work on it. I'm struggling to think of what you would do in a camp setting, right? Because if it typically needs like a speech therapist who is an expert on teaching chewing and eating, like that can't happen at camp. So maybe it is more about finding ways to like explain what's happening so it doesn't feel like that child is so singled out. And I wonder, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I wonder what you're saying.
Well, like I'm wondering if it's just sort of like kind of very flexible language, right? Like, well, some people like to eat a lot of things, some people only like to eat some things, and we want to make sure that you get your dinner and she gets her dinner, and kind of just skating over it without having to say, oh, well, she's autistic, so saltine crackers for her. Like, you're not, you get pasta. Because I don't think that's right. I don't think you want to like single out that kid, even though other children notice. I think that's tough. I do think maybe kind of back to the like headphones or sitting to the side, like maybe there are ways to make eating less overwhelming. And maybe it's like picking a seat or picking who you like to sit next to, having your favorite fork. Like maybe there are ways to make the meal itself a little bit less stressful. And then maybe the food itself is not quite as bad.
Yeah, I try to take the kids into the dining room during a time when nobody else is in there, and really like tour. And I do like a plate, and I like a little, sort of taste experience. Also, kids, I think also will, like if one child isn't eating, it goes both ways. But if a child, is unwilling to try things, sometimes other kids around will kind of go, well, I don't want to try it either. As opposed to, and it works the other way. Like someone's enjoying something, they go, "Ooh, I want to try that." But these days, I think kids and eating, that's just another whole topic we could probably like do. I actually am interested now, and that is another podcast for sure. But I think in this particular instance, if camp is a week, it's 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, whatever it is, it's not the whole life's, it's not a year of school.
Right.
So from my perspective, if a child's going to a camp for a week and that's how they can feel comfortable in terms of food, whether they're getting the proper nourishment or not, I feel like you've got 51 other weeks at home to deal with it. So I usually take my cues from the parents as to what is acceptable. What do you do at home? How do you make that work? If, they do go on a play date or whatever it is, and just try to, make it as comfortable as possible. I think a lot of times it's giving them the right chair to sit in, like you said, or space, so that they can have their own area and the kids aren't like overwhelming them with what's going on for them, and they can go from there. But it's an interesting topic, and it's definitely a challenge at camp. Because there aren't all these options either. Like saltines may not be offered to all the other children. Like we don't have saltines. So like now how do you accommodate? And do you also, how does that impact the other kids who are getting whatever they're getting?
Right.
So
I wonder if it's a similar conversation, like for kids who have allergies, because I do think that like students and campers that have some framework for, like some kids can't eat what we're eating. And so it might be a similar information, right? Like, oh, they can't eat this, right? Like they don't feel good after, or it's not good for their body, or they're allergic. And maybe it's that simple. I'm not sure.
Well, I think to the other kids, it's a perfect answer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just very clear these days. It's like they can't have that, it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't make them feel good, or this is what gives them their energy, and that's how they, what makes them happy,
Right.
But yeah, I think the allergy analogy is really good. So yeah, I mean, I think we've hit on some really interesting topics today. We've talked about play. We've talked about, the classroom in terms of, how to help parents communicate with their teachers, how to, I think there's a lot of things we covered. Is there anything else, Jenny, that you wanted to share about your background, about the groups that you run? I would just love, our audience to know how they can learn more about you and the great work that you do.
Sure. I appreciate that. So the easiest place to find me is online at all the social media platforms, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and it's Jenny Owens, BCBA. I am currently doing social skills groups in person in the Austin area, but we are building online. So for any families that are interested in that, I would love to hear from them so we could get that going. And then I do work privately with parents to create those skill-based support programs at home. And so all of that information is on my website. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, that's great. It was so nice meeting you today. And I appreciate your background, not only in the academic world and your journey through learning what it was for yourself that you wanted to bring to kids. And I just really appreciate the work you do. And I love that, it evolved from summer camp. That always makes us happy here at Happy Camper Live, that there's that little seed grew, and, and this is the impact you're having today. So thank you for being with us at the Raising a Happy Camper podcast. And I hope to have you back again, Jenny. We can talk some more.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Take a moment to shine.